And here we are.
We are here.
Yes. um, yes. And hopefully we will escape from the chronic hysteria and no longer have time looping. So,
Indeed.
yes. So this is a podcast dedicated to the secrets of the Time Lords, and welcome aboard, everyone. Today we're going to look at one of what we consider to be one of the great moments in Doctor Who. But first, an apology on account of the other not being able to make it. He apparently got himself frozen in time for 500 million years, and said he'll get back to us when that's over. So. Apologies for that, but I think you can make do with just the two of us tonight.
Yeah, I think we could pull it off.
Yeah.
I mean, we are quadriggers after all.
Yes, quadriggers. We still remember how to quadrig. Being a
Right.
quadrigger, it's kind of like knowing how to drive a stick in Gallifrey culture. The new people don't even know what one is.
Spoiled those newfangled TARDISes. TARDISes would probably be better.
I think TARDIS is the accepted one, but I have always had a soft spot in my heart for TARDI. But yes. Do we have any Who news?
No, not. Oh, actually, I can't remember what the Who news was. So we had. Let's see. Just in case we haven't. I guess we had offline discussions about the Disney stuff, but there's no further developments in that I've followed. But yeah.
All right.
So Disney has a stake in the future of Doctor Who, and some of us are excited, and some of us are nervous. I was nervous a week ago. In a lost, there's a lost, just like there's lost episodes of Doctor Who, there's lost episodes of this podcast. So in a lost episode, I was pretty frantic about it, if I recall.
Yes, in the original loop.
Tales from the loop.
Tales from the loop. Yes, the alternate timeline that it never was. Right. Well, then let's move on. I seem to recall that in the previous timeline we had quite a bit to say, so we'll see how things go. Today we're taking a look at The Beginning. I mean, seriously, that's the title. The Beginning. The Beginning. That is where we are going to begin today with The Beginning. The Beginning, in this case, is a Big Finish audio drama that was released as part of their 50th anniversary specials during the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. And it was released on November 13th, 2013 AD in the Humanian era. And mere 10 days before the actual 50th anniversary of Doctor Who, of the show. And again, this is written by Mark Platt, just like both of those Old Mortality and A Storm of Angels were written by Mark Platt. And here we go with the CD cover. There was two versions of this cover. And I suspect there was a recording of it might be two versions of this audio as well, given how things went together. Because when Name of the Doctor came out, it was revealed some details about the Doctor and Susan leaving Gallifrey, and including what the TARDIS looked like. The original version of this cover had this pyramidal-like structure right there in the center of the picture where the TARDIS is located, because that was based off of what the TARDIS was inferred to be in one of Mark Platt's novels, in his novel Lungbarrow.
Did I
And so
fail to
they
put
had
that image in here, or were you, or just?
no,
Oh, okay.
I wasn't sure if it was worth getting into this, but it feels right, and so
Oh, nice.
here we are talking about it. So they had to, after they'd already released the pre-publicity for this audio drama, including the cover, they had to revise it and come out with a new cover
Ah,
that had a TT capsule that looked like the TARDIS did in the actual Name of the Doctor flashback.
right.
Flashbacks, I guess they kind of, we did it twice there. They also had two versions of events, maybe three. Anyway, so, and I do wonder if they had to rewrite the audio, if they had to re-record some of Carol Ann Ford's narration about their departure from Gallifrey to make sure that it fit with what was seen. Because there's clearly a moment where the Doctor is talking to Clara. If you've seen Name of the Doctor, you know, oh, the Doctor's talking to Clara right now, and in this version. But I wonder if the original version had the wrong TARDIS on the cover. Did the original version also not have that beat? And what other differences might there have been in the departure narrative? I'm always kind of I'm curious to hear, find the original script. But
Right.
because
Exactly.
if they were far enough along that they'd already done the cover artwork, they probably already had a script, and the script probably didn't mention Clara, because it's pretty clear they didn't know that was going to happen. So.
Right.
But we are dealing with the final version of the timeline and the final version of this particular episode of Rassilon, Omega, and the other guy, and not one of the earlier iterations that had to be abandoned. In this final version, the space-time coordinates for this story are, well, I'm doing a bunch of math. The Doctor has to be about 342.
Okay.
If he's any younger than that, then Susan would look younger in the flashback from Name of the Doctor. And if he's much older than that, then there's not enough time for him to do all the adventuring he needs to do before Unearthly Child. So, it's really kind of got to be 342, maybe 343, potentially, if you want to mash things together and not leave too much room for other people to stick stuff in between The Beginning and Unearthly Child. And Susan's got to be at least 13 years old, but probably less than 14. I guess, so that they have enough time to do the other adventuring they need to do. But before we get to Susan being 16 in Unearthly Child.
Right.
Or no, she's 15 in Unearthly Child. So
That sounds about right. Like when I traveled with my grandparents, like adventures with your grandparents. That sounds about right as far as the age is concerned. It's like more like a babysitting thing usually, but was the Doctor babysitting Susan?
I think he was. I think at that point they were living together. I think him bailing on her when she's 13 or 14 is probably like, and especially by Gallifreyan age rates, that's like a babe in arms,
Right.
for as far as how she'd be viewed in Gallifreyan culture. Also, when we do get around to talking about the Revolution, there are some very good reasons why the Doctor might not want to leave Susan behind, but we'll get into that in another
Right.
episode. So,
Right.
So Gallifreyan date index is about 309798, maybe 99. In the Rassilon era, but they leave Gallifrey. They jump in the TARDIS and make a space-time jump to about 4.5 million BC, Humanian era, and end up landing on the moon, on Earth's moon. But it's not the same moon, because we know that every few hundred million years, the moon hatches and releases a big space moon dragon thing that then lays an identical moon egg. So, interestingly, this is not our moon, at least not as we know it, that they materialize on in this story. Though Mark Platt certainly didn't know that when he wrote this episode. I don't know why Mark Platt couldn't just foresee that writers of Doctor Who would reveal that the moon is in fact a giant space egg that gets hatched and replaced by a new space egg every few hundred billion years. It seems obvious to me, but Mark Platt apparently was not able to see that in his time scanner.
And instant and an instant replacement egg, but mind you, like it's almost like magic.
Yes, almost like magic. I mean, any sufficiently advanced technology, but even the Time Lords might have a little trouble conjuring a moon out of nowhere in a moment's notice. So, yes, this introduces an interesting continuity question because in the story, the Doctor, Susan, and Stoyne, I don't know if you can really call him a stowaway in the context, but anyway, Stoyne, the Time Lord Stoyne, all get frozen in time for 500,000 years. And when they get free, it's around 2090 AD, so about 45 years after the last time the egg hatched, in the episode Kill the Moon. So it's got to be a different moon. So yeah, I can only assume that that like some animals recycle their eggs. Like after they hatch, they'll eat the egg for nutrients. It's kind of their first meal. So maybe the dragon eats and then uses the moon rocks as to secrete to lay the new egg, or make the shell of the new egg, so that the frozen TARDIS and Doctor and gang and the Acherons could all be still on this new moon underground. They aren't very clear nobody says anything like everything looks the same. They just say they're still on the moon. So,
or what we see looks like a being hatching out of our moon and the moon instantly replacing it, but it could be an interdimensional hatching, in which case our moon remains intact, but the illusion is that something is coming out of it when in fact the being is coming from another dimension.
I mean, sure, that makes as much sense as anything. Yeah. Why? It's hard to make less sense than a moon dragon.
That would explain the seismic events on the moon, like leading right up to it. You know what I mean? Like the moon actually goes through a lot of seismic action, but it doesn't actually hatch. It just looks as though it's hatching, and then since the creature comes through some sort of dimensional crack,
yeah,
once that heals up, the moon goes back to normal state of geology.
Yeah. There might be some wiggle room with the 2090 date, in that they don't specifically state the date in the story, but they talk about having a big thriving moon colony, which is not what they have in Kill the Moon. It sounds like they're much more primitive, and it's much more of just a few people in a can sitting on the surface or something. Or was it? No, it was a spaceship they landed. They don't even mention there being a moon base. So it's hard to say. It's really hard to place this audio before Kill the Moon from the point of view of there's no space. I mean, I suppose the moon hatched and that destroyed the space colony, but I suppose you could argue. And so there was a space colony in the early 21st century on the moon, and then the moon hatched and that destroyed the space colony. But nobody mentions the space colony in Kill to the Moon. Nobody says, but what about all the people on the space colonies?
Right.
Did it fail and they shut it down? Did Elon Musk and the other universe run out of money? I like
my theory and your theory as well, but
so anyway, there's definitely some fuzziness that the continuity cops need to smooth over there.
This is a good time to remind the audience that if you have an idea of how to fix that, continuity, or like just to make it smoother, not fix it necessarily, let us know in the comments, right?
Yes. And if you like this video, like it.
Oh, like it and
Yes.
subscribe. Hit the subscribe
Subscribe
button
button.
too.
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Um, we are definitely in the early points where our baby moondragon has just hatched and is still trying to determine whether it will survive in this big, strange cosmos where everything is slightly more based on real science than it is. So, anyway, well, we specialize in Time Lord continuity and Gallifreyan continuity. So the vagaries of exactly what's going on with Earth's moon and resolving those continuity conundrums is not exactly our remit. But I would encourage somebody to have a go at it. I do think the hatching moon solves a lot of problems with the Silurian timelines. I think maybe they go into hibernation every time the moon hatches, and that explains
That's right.
a whole lot of things about how when they went into hibernation doesn't seem remotely consistent across the breadth of Doctor Who. But if they go into hibernation every few 100 million years or something, then it starts seeming like the data points make a bit more sense.
I love that Doctor Who is introducing this like larger scale of and including geology, no matter what the source of it is, a dragon hatching or like whatever it is. There are these massive events that occur across these great time scales, right?
Yes.
And those have cycles as well, for at least a limited period of time. And so it's pretty interesting to see that Doctor Who is a show, both in the audio dramas as we hear here, but also especially in the visual drama, that can show those timescales, and that's one of its like great strengths over other shows.
Yes, and I do want to slip in there. I actually like Kill the Moon. It's just so daft and crazy that I can't help but admire the audacity of somebody who of Kill the Moon. I think it's fun. I know it's wildly impossible from a scientific point of view, but that has never stopped Doctor Who before, so I don't know why it should stop it now.
I'm going to have to say that I have not yet given Kill the Moon a second opinion, but my first impression of it was exactly what you said. It felt a little too daft, but I do like to revisit episodes that I didn't appreciate the first time, because the more you learn about Doctor Who, like as you go along your journey of like rediscovering like classic Doctor Who, or for example, like adding the color of this audio drama to Doctor Who, you're like, oh well, I kind of want to go back and give that a second impression now, like to see exactly what we were talking about, is how does it fit in to the to the bonkers but larger continuity of Doctor Who. I think a visual illustration that I've always been fond of is on Trenzalore, seeing a Time Lord's lifespan visualized with these like basically solid beams, but then branches that like went everywhere, around these this central focal point. And it like was a really neat way of depicting it. And I think that's what Doctor Who continuity is basically like as well.
I mean, I usually like, I mean, continuity in the loosest possible meaning of the word. But and I think this is the game we play. We take all the little pieces that the designers of which never intended for them to connect together, and try connecting them together and see what emerges. And I'll admit that, there are definitely other ways to decode or deconstruct Doctor Who than this, and probably much more valid ways, certainly with more artistic integrity. Elizabeth Sandifer has her TARDIS Eruditorum books, which are fantastic analysis of the Doctor Who stories in the context with which they were released, and do an amazing job of burying them. That also Tatwood and the Tatwood's About Time series is also utterly brilliant at that. So there are sources out there that look at them, but look at the things in the context of the actual broadcast and how they would have been viewed by the audience at the time, how the writer would have intended them to be viewed at the audience of the time, and that is certainly a very valid, probably more valid way to look at things. However, I have always found myself fascinated by seeing how things retroactive continuity can highlight and diminish and shine new lights on and recontextualize works of Doctor Who, and in fact, Star Trek and Star Wars and other things that I enjoy as well. And so that's what this podcast is largely about. So that's why we're bringing up moon dragons, even though Mark Platt didn't have any idea about the moon dragons when he wrote that episode. So
exactly.
But yes, let's talk a little bit about this. Let's talk about the Doctor leaving Gallifrey. So shortly before leaving Gallifrey, the Doctor meets up with his friend and oh my.
Oh.
Hold on a moment.
Sure thing.
All right. I'm sorry. Two of our cats are still learning how to coexist with each other.
Oh, wow. That was
sometimes that requires the dispensation of a squirt gun.
That's what happens. Those Lord President cats do.
Yes, they fight with each other, just like Pertwee and Troughton, just like the first and second Doctors. They just can't stand each other. And I've got one cat that positively turns into a Valyard cat.
Well, the audience may not know what we're talking about, because I might just edit that out, but we might also just leave it in, so you might be in on it. We'll see.
Yes, for the audience's benefit, if this does stay in, I have a presidential cat that has all 9 of its incarnations living simultaneously in the house at the same time, and they don't necessarily get on. Some of them don't get on very well. I've definitely got a Valyard cat here. So, a distillation of all that is evil with the presidential cat. All right. So, shortly before leaving Gallifrey, we go to that point when the Doctor's around 342. The Doctor starts meeting up with his friend and partner in crime, the Time Lady Ruath, often meeting in the Panopticon Library, and they plan their escape. At this point, virtually no one has ever conceived of going renegade and stealing a TARDIS and leaving Gallifrey. And I think even at this point, even the Corsair is loosely associated with Gallifreyan's. The Corsair's travels are loosely associated with the Time Lord legal system.
Right.
So Ruath is very upset by the revolutionary events going on, and they decide that they're going to leave together on one of the TARDIS, on a TARDIS that is retired and due for the breakers. The Doctor will later claim that he would have preferred to steal his own Type 50 TARDIS. The Doctor owned a Type 50 TARDIS, but it was not available at the time he left. And I would love to get some more details on why wasn't it available, because it later ends up taking off on its own and following him out into space, trying to find him again, like a little lost puppy. And it's all horribly tragic in the end.
As far as I know, the show hasn't done it, but has the audio dramas ever done Type 50 Doctor adventures? So, like, are they boring? Is it just like him doing surveys? Or like what was he doing?
I don't know if there's
TARDIS?
anything where we can. I don't know if there's any story where we can definitively say the Doctor is in his own is in that Type 50 TARDIS. We have some stories of him doing missions for the Time Lords, but generally the TARDIS doesn't seem to. No TARDIS seems to feature prominently in those stories. He's just he's already where he needs to be,
I'll
or
say
he's on
that's
Gallifrey, or it just doesn't provide any narrative context as to how he got to where he is. He just mentions he's on a mission for the Time Lords.
I think that's something interesting that speaking of my icon here, the most recent Doctor, number 13, that would have been a neat thing to explore since they were already doing all these like renegade version flashback Doctor stories. I think it would have been neat to see a maybe even cast a new person in the role of a younger William Bradley-ish, rather I should say Hartnell-ish.
We need somebody who looks like a young version of David Bradley playing William Hartnell,
Hartnell,
playing
exactly.
the Doctor.
Bradley came to mind first. I'm sorry, William Hartnell. I'm sorry. It was recency bias. Either way, the Doctor is a younger version of themselves. Like on a Type 50 would be a neat thing to explore.
Yeah, that would be. I'd certainly be fascinated by that. There is at a bit of a tangent here, but there is a big question hovering over the Ruth Doctor, the fugitive Doctor's TARDIS. Is that the same Type 40? Because we seem to see her doing all of her adventuring back during the time of Rassilon, but the Doctor's Type 40 isn't that old. So what's going on there? Is it a different TARDIS that happens to look like that also likes turning into a police box? Or is it the same TARDIS that likes the police box? And
I would say that if a past incarnation of the Doctor actually is more aware of like the Doctor's future, it might be sentimental, and they're turning their Type 50 into a Type 40 lookalike, just to make it look like the.
Well, this would have to be like a Type 20 or something for the future, given the other dating information we have about the fugitive Doctor. It would be like a type, much earlier, unless there's more than one fugitive Doctor. There are 2 Tom Baker Doctors. There are 2 David Tennant Doctors.
Oh, that's right.
Arguably, Death Comes to Time gives us a second Sylvester McCoy Doctor. So maybe there's 2. Joe, what's her name? Last name, can't remember. Anyway, 2
Joe Martin.
Joe Martin. Maybe there are 2 Joe Martin Doctors. One back during the time of Rassilon, one much closer to the present when the Type 40 TARDIS would have actually been available to go adventuring in. So it could still be the same TARDIS.
Interesting. Very interesting.
I kind of just came up with that just now, but that might be the best fix at the moment. Because all the stuff in Flux is where we see her back during the dark times, but all the stuff in Fugitive of the Jadoon is where we see her with the police box TARDIS. And those two don't cross over. We don't see the police box TARDIS in the big flashbacks. Of course, I don't think anyone writing Joe Martin comics or Joe Martin audio dramas are paying any attention to this. So we'll see. Even if the theory works now, whether or not it will stay functional is another question. Or whether it'll end up being nope, they're clearly the same incarnation. Could end up happening. So anyway, but this is that is another period of history. Let's focus on the Doctor.
We'll do a specialized episode on that at some point. There
will definitely be some episodes on that coming up relatively soon, hopefully before the new year. So anyway, the Doctor and Ruath decide they're going to leave, and the Doctor decides he can't get a hold of his own Type 50. I don't know if Ruath is an apprentice Time Lord and doesn't have her own TARDIS, as opposed to a senior TARDIS, senior Time Lord who would own a TARDIS, or if Ruath's TARDIS is also not available. Certainly the security around the repair depot seemed to be worse than anywhere else, from what I understand. The Doctor will also later admit that he would have been at the time he was willing to maim or kill somebody if it was necessary to escape his homeworld. So, yeah. The doctor that we listened to in this audio drama was willing to kill somebody in order to get himself and Susan off the planet.
It's some like I guess revolutionary stuff going on
Yeah,
Gallifrey at this
I
time,
guess
because
so.
reminiscent of revolutionary times, especially in the Russian history, with czars and stuff having to be killed or whatever. Like they have to,
Yes.
like, it's life or death type of stuff. And yeah, it's crazy. This, like, I like the way it's read too in this audio drama. The kind of escape from Gallifrey. But I'm getting ahead of
Yeah.
myself. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's no problem. Do you know what one of the doctor's favorite points in history is?
No.
French Revolution.
Ah. That would
So,
explain things. Yeah.
um, so, as part of this plan, the Doctor hires his buddy and inspiration and hero, the Corsair, to go steal the hand of Omega to help with his escape. It's also stated that he really doesn't want any of the factions involved in this revolution to have control of the hand of Omega. So we also know that at some time around this point, the Master, or he was known at that point, Kashi, um, which is the name of a Russian a witch from, not a warlock or a witch or something from Russian mythology.
Oh,
But
interesting.
yeah, the Master would never embed himself into Russian mythology, except when he does. So, anyway, Kashi.
Rah rah Rasputin.
Kashi has figured out that the Doctor is going to go renegade and steal a TARDIS, so he gives Susan, or as she was known among the Time Lords in public, Lady Larn, a crimson jewel as a present. But the jewel is actually a communication node that will allow the Master to communicate with Susan no matter where in the cosmos she is, so that the Master can keep an eye on what the Doctor is getting up to. So yeah, that happens. The Master has figured out that the Doctor is going to leave and plants this thing. Meanwhile, we have Cardinal Arkendo, who is working both for the revolutionaries and the powers that be, President Pandad the Eighth, at the same time, playing both sides against each other, and ends up having the Doctor inadvertently, or somewhat unintentionally, ends up revealing the plans of the revolutionaries, and the Cardinal Arkendo, in order to get revenge on the Doctor for screwing up his plans, Cardinal Arkendo convinces Lord President Pandad VIII to have the Doctor assassinated. And as it so happens, the Doctor's brother, or possibly cousin, though the word he uses is brother in the books, Braxiatel, has just become the Lord President's new burner, the Lord Burner, which
right.
is the title of the presidential assassin. So, fortunately for the Doctor, his brother happens to be the person carrying out the assassination on him and Susan, or Lady Larn, as she would have been known. And so he instead just warns the Doctor that the president wants you assassinated. And I'm supposed to be doing it. Perhaps because of this, perhaps for other reasons. It's I don't know. I feel like there has to be more to this than what we've heard. On the actual day of departure, the planned day, the Doctor decides to leave Ruath behind because he doesn't think she's up to actually being a renegade. Is the reason he states when he's confronted by her centuries later. And he believes that she should be a political rebel and stay and keep the High Council in line and help the revolutionaries. So he leaves a message for Ruath to this effect and skips his appointment with her. But Ruath never gets the message. So all he knows is that when the day comes, he never shows up, and then he finds out, she waits, he never shows up. She finds out later he left without her, which was not the plan, and she never knows why. So yeah,
I'm
and
curious. I'm curious. The everyone seems to have like another name, but I know that in the modern series they make a big deal about the Doctor's actual name, and based on who you talk to, the name's not that important, or it's been said before, or it's what is it, Sigma Theta or whatever. But yeah, I noticed the name of the Doctor has always been kind of absent, um, for the most part. What is the name of the Doctor?
we'll discuss that a little bit later on in this episode, as I recall.
Yeah.
I think that's one of our topics. That's
Oh, okay, okay. Sorry, I read these
um,
notes a week ago.
yes, we
I
will be
should have read them
discussing the
again.
nature of all these. Why do these people all have multiple names? We're going to get
That's
into
right.
that, but later on.
Okay.
So, but yes, it is on today's agenda. Um, so. It's a very good question. A question so good that I did make sure that it was on the list of things to discuss.
One
But
might say I found it through the loop.
so, uh, the Doctor had always planned to take his granddaughter, Lady Larn, as we know her, Susan, with him, but he does not tell her about that he's taking her anywhere until the very last minute. He tells her is they have to take the Hand of Omega and get away so that neither side will have access to the Hand of Omega. Never mind that the whole reason the Hand of Omega is on Gallifrey is because the Doctor hired the Corsair to go get it. So I'm not entirely clear if that's how much of this is the truth, or is it just a convenient excuse to explain things to Susan. Susan has time to grab some clothes and a few books, but she didn't actually know that they were leaving the planet until they entered a TARDIS. And Susan is under the impression that she's just an accidental hanger-on, that the Doctor never actually intended to take her with him, but just ended up deciding that he couldn't leave her behind. When in fact, it was always the plan to take Susan, but the Doctor never makes that clear to her. So... this is the Hartnell Doctor. This is the first Doctor. He's very secretive. He keeps things close to his chest, and he's very unpredictable and ethically a little uncertain, as he later admits. Yeah, I was willing to kill somebody if that's what it took to get off this planet. Fortunately, he doesn't end up having to kill anybody. But Braxiatel, the Lord Burner assassin, allows the Doctor and Susan to escape, and the Doctor and Susan become the second and third people to ever survive a burn edict from the Lord President. An assassination assignment, if you will. Braxiatel being the first person. We know that the Doctor's blue stoned ring is a key part in his escape from Gallifrey, but he does not elaborate. But that key kind of seemed to function as a little bit like a sonic screwdriver in the early eras of the show, i.e. whenever they needed the Doctor to magically be able to do something, sometimes opening doors, he could use his ring to work some magic. But we know that after finding out that that Braxiatel was not going through with his assassination as planned, the President six the watch on the Doctor, and the watch, the Gallifreyan police force, drives the Doctor and Susan down below the Citadel walkways, opening fire on them with stasers that are set to kill. The Doctor, Susan, and the Hand of Omega eventually sneak into a TARDIS dry dimension work dock repair bay in the underlevel of the Citadel. In the original timeline, he illegally steals a Type 40 because it was the Type 40 TARDIS because it was unlocked, not realizing that the Type 40 had deliberately unlocked the door to lure him in. However, after his biodata gets infected by the Great Intelligence in name of the Doctor, there are now two unlocked time ships available, and the Doctor needs Clara's guidance to pick the Type 40 over the other TARDIS. This turns out to be the same Type 40 that he served on as an apprentice Time Lord. And we know that originally it belonged to Castellan Marnell, but he lost access to it around the time the Doctor was born, or loomed. The Hartnell Doctor, that is. So We don't really know who he was serving when the Doctor was an apprentice Time Lord working on this Type 40 TARDIS. My personal fan theory is it was Asmiel from Twin Dilemma, who the Doctor says was a mentor and a teacher who taught him how and seems to regard very well, but very highly. But we do know he served on that TARDIS before he stole it. And there would have been a senior Time Lord that was actually in charge of that TARDIS, because it wasn't the Doctor's TARDIS. The Doctor eventually gets a Type 50 when he gets elevated to the rank of senior Time Lord. So, unfortunately, he steals this Type 40 before the repairs could be made in the navigational system and the main time mechanism, and before the chameleon conversion could be performed. And this means that within a year or two, within just a few years, the chameleon circuit will completely fail, as we see at the beginning of Unearthly Child. And it will apparently revert back into a police box from its time with the fugitive Doctor. Maybe that's a different TARDIS, and the fugitive Doctor the Doctor just tends to turn TARDISes into police boxes for some reason.
Or the police box is somehow a reoccurring construct in the universe over time and space, because it was somehow introduced into Legendarium because of the Doctor's numerous travels.
There were past TARDIS types that were also the Doctor's ship.
Right, exactly.
The Type 40 was not the TARDIS's first incarnation.
In fact, there might even be a little hero worship going on with other TARDIS matrices.
We're going to need to write an episode titled The Timeless TARDIS.
The Timeless TARDIS, it's true.
The Timeless Time Ship.
It's true. It's become indispensable. It's the what was it? The oldest carving was the TARDIS, right? Like, or something like that. I forget what it was, but remember,
I think there was that message that
that was song. Sweetie. Never mind.
Yeah,
else.
Sweetie.
But the I don't know. I just imagine the TARDIS having like legend status with all the traveling the Doctor's done at this point.
Yeah. Well, we will definitely dig into what I like to call the Halfling Project, with the Doctor and Master's TARDIS and some of their strange origins that aren't true for most other TARDISes, but not today. So, the Doctor and the TARDIS steal each other, though the Doctor thinks he's simply borrowing the TARDIS and plans to return it to Gallifrey someday. And in fact, the Doctor and Susan both think they're not going to be away from Gallifrey for all that long at this point. The Doctor has a very somewhat specific quest that he feels he can accomplish in a relatively short amount of time. I mean, for Time Lords, that could be decades, centuries, but they are Susan and the Doctor are very much of the opinion they will be returning to Gallifrey to resume their lives or resume new lives. However, the TARDIS never intends to return the Doctor to Gallifrey. TARDIS has other plans. Well, the Doctor thinks he's borrowing a TARDIS, but the TARDIS is absolutely stealing a Doctor. And we've learned the TARDIS doesn't actually know who the Doctor really is and simply thinks of the Doctor as my thief. And I assume this is a reference to the timeless child aspect of the Doctor's existence, that the TARDIS doesn't really know the secret of who the timeless child is and where he or she came from. The TARDIS views the traveling with the Doctor as a fun game, and sees the possibility of him dying as being a silly inconvenience, even though she knows she's going to end up being the Doctor's tomb on Trenzalore. So that's how the TARDIS sees these events. And being a four-dimensional being, knows right from the start, oh, there's the guy I'm going to be his tomb. So that's the one. So. However, it turns out that they have that Quadrigger 3911, a Gallifreyan, not Time Lord, but Gallifreyan named Stoyne, was inside the TARDIS starting to dismantle the engines of it, so that he could get it ready for its final trip to the vaporizers at the breakers. and ends up being pulled off of Gallifrey, and in fact badly wounded because he's down in the mechanisms of the engine of the switch room when all the power kicks on, when the Doctor switches everything on and dematerializes and gets himself a bit cooked and badly burned on his face because of this. And needless to say, Stoin is not very happy about this, and perhaps because the TARDIS was partially disassembled, power fails as soon as the TARDIS enters the vortex.
Right.
But the Hand of Omega does help them materialize on the Earth's moon. The Doctor, Susan, and Stoin witness the Archeons, a group of aliens, altering the evolution of life on the planet Earth as part of a big experiment. But the Archeons are forced to abandon their experiment when Stoin accidentally freezes them in time for over 500,000 years. So the Doctor, Susan, the TARDIS, the Archeons, all of them frozen on one dragon moon, and wake up on a different dragon moon 4.5 million years later, or 450 million years later. Fortunately, this works out well for the Doctor, because the TARDIS has millions of years to absorb energy and regenerate its power systems from the drained state that it was in on Gallifrey. The Archeons, once they escape from the frozen time, immediately try to destroy the humans that have evolved on Earth and set up a moon base in their absence, because this was not what they were planning to do. And the whole thing smacks a little of the movie Prometheus a bit.
Right.
They attack the humans, but it looks like they lose the battle. Stoin is left on the moon, and the Doctor and Susan depart in the TARDIS for new adventures. There's also, yes, poor Stoin, who does come back and harass the Fourth Doctor in a later story titled Lunam Romana, I think. And I think there might have even been a third Stoin story.
Oh, wow.
Maybe, I'm not sure. Anyway, he spends forever trying to get back to Gallifrey. There's a short story that is set right after this titled The Exiles. I guess you could call it a sequel, though I think it was actually written first, where shortly after leaving Gallifrey, the TARDIS begins to wake up from its hibernation. There we learn that the Doctor's not going to form a symbiotic link with his TARDIS because it will leave a symbiotic footprint everywhere the TARDIS goes, and will allow the TARDIS the Time Lords to track them, which does raise the question of how the TARDIS is traveling through space and time if it doesn't have a symbiotic link. We know that later the Doctor will install a symbiotic bypass, but how did it make that crucial first space-time jump without a symbiotic bypass? And I think, Sohel, you had the theory that perhaps Stoin might have installed one as part of his job to navigate the TARDIS to the breakers. And that would make sense, since Stoin, being a Gallifreyan and not a Time Lord, would not have a symbiotic nuclei of his own. And so he would need to have a bypass if he was going to drive TARDISes to the breakers. Also, Susan has a symbiotic nuclei. She is Time Lady Larn, after all.
Right.
So maybe the TARDIS bonded with her, which you would then raise, well, wouldn't that cause the tracking problem? But Susan's pedigree, Susan's origin is so convolutedly twisted through time and space that it's likely she's not in the modern Time Lord records, unlike the Doctor. So it might be that they couldn't actually. Susan would be a safe person to form a bond with the TARDIS, and her footprints would not be recognizable to the Time Lords. A third possibility is the Hand of Omega might have just used its magical powers to act as a symbiotic nuclei. It might be the Hand of Omega has its own symbiotic nuclei, or is just capable of creating such a thing. Though the Hand was constructed well before the discovery of symbiotic nuclei on Gallifrey, so that seems unlikely, but not impossible. Perhaps
Unless the Hand is somehow exempt from, the confines of its moment or whatever, and it could be transdent. What is it? Trans
Transitional,
dimensionally. Yeah.
dimensionally transcendental.
Thank you. Dimensionally transcendental hand of Omega, and then it could possibly create things on the fly, maybe even like
Yeah.
as it needs it.
Yes, it might have had its own set of dematerialization codes that it could substitute in for the partial copy that the Type 40 TARDIS was trying to work with. Because I think they had discovered dematerialization theory at that point. I don't know.
It
I'd have
may
to
even
check.
have like some kind of weird bespoke circuitry that can like create whatever it needs. You
Yeah.
know,
And it could have learned a thing or two. It's been around since
right?
the time of Rassilon. Just because it was built without a symbiotic nuclei on board doesn't mean it didn't figure out how to get one.
Get one, yeah.
And the Doctor was planning this trip, so maybe he arranged to make sure it had one before he left or some such. But we do know it takes the Hartnell Doctor quite a while to form a proper symbiotic link. In fact, quite possibly he might not do it until Susan leaves. So let's talk a little about the characters. First,
Nice.
this is a one of their companion chronicles, so it's largely Carol Ann Ford performing almost all the parts in this, except for the part of Stoyne. She plays William Hartnell's doctor. She plays all the other guest stars as well are voiced by her, as well as the linking narration. And here, whereas before we've encountered Carol Ann Ford playing an older, more mature Susan, who is president-elect and then president of Gallifrey, here we have Carol Ann Ford trying to play the 14-year-old Susan. And though there is sort of a context that she's an older Susan telling us this story at some point. But yeah, I think she does a pretty good job of trying to give us a 14-year-old Susan, given the actress was in her 60s or 70s, I think, when this was recorded. So,
I certainly got lost in the performance in a positive way. Carol Ann Ford's a really compelling actor, a voice actor, and I liked how kind of her references to Hartnell's own performances. And I think I forget if you or I mentioned this, but well, she would have worked with him so closely that she's quite well placed to be doing impressions of him. So
yeah,
like,
she is one of the very few, relatively few people on the planet who is still alive and who worked with the original William Hartnell.
And they got on really well, apparently. So yeah.
Yes. So there is that. She would have insights into how he played the character, perhaps on a level that that most other people wouldn't at this point. And then this character of Stoyne is voiced by a different actor. This is voiced by the actor Terry Malloy, who most people know as Davros from Resurrection of the Daleks, Revelation of the Daleks, Remembrance of the Daleks, the stage play Trial of the Daleks, and Terry Malloy has shown up in over 30 Doctor Who audios and loads of other Doctor Who credits, most of the time playing Davros. There was a bit of a... there were many people who expressed their disappointment when he was not hired to play Davros at Journey's End, or what was it, Witches Familiar or something like that. The Master Doctor Davros story.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe he was offered the job and felt he was at an age where he didn't want all that makeup glued to his face, but they got somebody else, even though he was still alive and still to this day is the Big Finish Davros. Whenever they need Davros, they get him, Terry Malloy. He does a really good job at all of these roles. I think he does he may not be the original Davros, but he's pretty good. He's one of the better ones. So,
I really enjoyed him as Stoyne too, so I think it's great that he got to branch out a little and do a new character, or a different character, I should say.
Yes, yeah, and he gets to play. He's also played a few other parts on Doctor Who TV as well, as I recall, besides Davros. But Well, let's talk about the characters. The Doctor. What did you think of Carol? We talked a little about Carol Ann Ford's Doctor. Did you have any other thoughts on that, or?
No, just yeah, just she. I think she was great as the Doctor. I think it took me. I highly recommend listening to this audio a second time because I personally, the first time around, I think was like a little distracted by it because I'm not used to it. I'm used to different actors playing the different parts. So it took me a bit of time to get used to the format. And once I did, though, it was great. Like I really enjoyed it after that.
Yeah, the Companion Chronicles occupy this weird place where they're not full cast audio dramas, but they're significantly more than just an audio novel of a person reading a book. And
Right.
there's not
I mean,
there's music and sound effects. There's also
right.
Stoin is played by somebody else, and they tend to be written in a hybrid format that's somewhere between a novel text and a prose piece and a audio and a script, or in a more traditional audio drama form.
Right.
So yeah, it takes a little getting used to. I have to be honest, I've never entirely liked the weirdness of it. I would rather they just recast people and do a full audio drama, which is where Big Finish eventually got to. But at the time this was made, Big
They
Finish
had like a
was adamant they were never going to recast anybody.
right.
And at the time this came out, I think they'd recast Adric, but they wanted somebody to play old Adric. But in that one, but other than that, no major character had ever been recast. So I did think it was a nice touch that the script included the Hartnell name fluffs, the Billy fluffs, as they're sometimes known, where he mispronounces Stoin's name and stuff.
Yeah, that was great.
Or misremembers Stoin's name, I think is more a better description. So
It's like what they do that with Danny, right? Danny Pink, or who was it that there was someone in the modern?
they do play it with Mickey and Ricky.
Oh, Mickey and Ricky as well.
But
That's
there
right.
it
And then
just
there
sounds
turns
like
out
the
to be a
Doctor's being an asshole as opposed
but
to.
there turns out to be a Ricky,
Yes. But
which
it
is
kind of still feels like the Doctor's just trying to be mean there rather than the Hartnell Doctor who's clearly just has trouble with names.
right.
I really liked Susan. Again, it's Carol Ann Ford, the original Susan. And I loved her line, "All this nature felt unnatural," which drives home the psychological differences and cultural difference and culture shock that a Gallifreyan would be experiencing on leaving Gallifrey like this. Time Lords don't generally leave their cities. And when they do, they stay in the train the whole way there for the most part, or they'll transmat from one city to the next. And when they use their TARDISes, they don't generally leave their TARDISes. And when they do, it's in one of
Right.
those big environmental suits that Stoin puts on because he's trying to follow protocol. So the idea of being immersed in a world of plants, as Susan finds herself, is the nature felt unnatural. I thought that was an excellent bit of way to summarize all that up.
I forget if I asked you this before, but do the Time Lord suits have like an anti time tampering technology of some kind, like an anti butterfly effect technology?
It would not surprise me if they have some sort of perception filter built into them,
Right.
which is
That's what I
effectively
meant.
the same thing.
Yeah.
Basically, the people sapient beings have a thing called a reality quotient in Doctor Who, and when your reality quotient drops below 1, your ability to affect history reduces, and that makes you less likely to be noticed by people. You literally can't. It makes it harder for people to see you. And the TARDIS generally runs at a reality quotient of about zero point 0.9, so that this is why people generally don't get all that shocked to see a police box sitting around in various weird places. I mean, it still happens from some people because some people are better at seeing through the perception filter than others. But in general, yeah, it's And so I'm pretty much, the suit's got to have a perception filter on it that reduces the wearer's reality quotient down a notch. So that
That makes sense.
they're less likely to be noticed, and spotted and remembered. Even if somebody does see them, they're unlikely to remember them, and stuff like that. And yeah, so, and yeah.
I wonder how that factors in with the silence. That's interesting. They must have a
Oh,
very
no, I think the silence have very low reality quotients. I
yeah.
think
It's
that's so
fascinating.
low that you just forget about them moments after you look at them. And yeah, I think that's pretty much the whole deal with the silence, in
But
my
somehow
opinion,
they're
is
able to
just very,
convey what you remembered about them once you make eye contact again. So they have a fascinating
yeah.
like I
Well,
guess
to
mix
some
of that.
degree, you just need something to remind you,
Right.
But, oh,
The
wait, yeah, those things. Why did I forget about that? But yeah, I don't quite know how the silence hypnotism works, because this should make hypnotism really, really hard, and instead they're really good at it. Like, so good that you just have to like put a little message in a videotape and show it to people, and everyone will do it. Speaking of hypnotism and mind control, we do get to see a little bit of Susan's psionic powers,
Mhm.
which is nice, because I think they only got brought up once or twice in the actual TV show. So I was glad that we got to see a bit more of that here. Um, so yeah, it was great fun seeing Susan again. I am a huge Susan fan. Sometimes I'm more of a fan of the concept of Susan than the actual execution of Susan. But I don't blame Carol Ann Ford for any of that. I think she did a great job with the script she was given. I just think the writers weren't necessarily didn't quite see all the potential that she could have had.
Yeah.
I think if you sat down somebody and showed them Stranger Things and then had them go off to write Susan in a Doctor Who reboot, they would have no trouble finding loads of stuff for Susan to do. But for some reason, that just wasn't something they could quite get their hands on back in 1963, and I don't know why.
Well, I'm certainly a Susan stan, and I've been one of these people that kind of like always wonders if we'll get more Susan in Doctor Who. So I hope we do get more Susan in televised Doctor Who. I'm glad we got
Yeah,
lots of Susan in
I mean,
audio.
the 60th anniversary is, assuming nothing bad happens to Caroline Ford in the next year, a obvious place to do it. And especially since we've now had our William Russell callback with Power of the Doctor, so it's really feels weird. It's going to feel weird if Carol Ann Ford doesn't show up. And you can literally have her show up for a quick cameo and then regenerate her into somebody else. I get that the actress is probably not up for running up and down corridors anymore and remembering several pages of script, but she's a Time Lord. You can
Yeah.
regenerate her into somebody new, and I think it would be a little sad if they brought her back without bringing Carol Ann Ford back for at least a short cameo. But
There's some fishy Susan stuff that's been laying dormant for a while, so I'm really hoping you're right about that because we certainly some folks speculated the lady who was covering her face behind Rassilon in the could have been Susan, and I like the idea that a regenerated Susan could join the new mix, and be part of the Doctor's journey
yeah,
again. So that's certainly a compelling idea and notion, and it'd be a neat counterpoint, perhaps, to what I think. We don't know Shooty's Doctor yet, but but it might be a neat thing to have a Susan come into the mix with Shooty. That'd be a cool thing.
yeah. I don't know if I'd want her. I mean, I guess they'd have to have a really good idea and plan if they were going to make her a full time companion. But doing a one off special where Susan comes back, that seems like a no-brainer. There's so much interesting stuff you can do. That just writes itself. I mean, even if you give her a family that can be the Doctor's great grandchildren, and the end, the Doctor says goodbye, and off he goes. And maybe you even bring her back, like you bring back Kate Stewart and Jackie Tyler and stuff every now and then, because I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of storytelling potential here that's being left on the table by not
Oh
doing
yeah.
anything. And I get why the novels and Big Finish are a little shy of doing too much, because they never know what the TV show might come along and run over with them. They did do Susan's War, and we see Susan fighting the Time War, but they don't kill her off, even though the Doctor implies that he used to be a grandfather in, what is it, Empty Child, I think.
Right.
Implying that he knows or certainly believes that Susan is dead now.
There's two huge tragedies in modern Doctor Who that I would love to see corrected, and I feel like Susan might be a character that could like be woven into the storyline to help correct some of these things. Do you want to know what those two big storylines are?
Lay them on me.
Donna Noble got the short end of the stick, man.
Well, we know Donna Noble's coming back.
Right, so I'm excited about that.
You got that one. You can check that one off the list right now.
The other one is Amy and Rory never getting to raise River from babyhood. Like, that's hard. That was a hard one. So if there's a timey-wimey Susan solution to this, I would totally accept it.
I kind of missed the fact that we didn't get a scene where they said, "Oh yeah, okay." Where River says, "No, you don't raise me. I remember my life. I wasn't raised by you. It didn't happen, so you can't go back and do it. It's over. It's done." And you never did find me when I was a little baby or kid. And then they have to deal with that. I kind of really wish instead we got Let's Kill Hitler, which just feels to me like was fun, but this other thing was important, and we just completely gloss over the fact that they missed her whole childhood.
Right.
And I kind of wanted to see the moment where they come to terms with that. Right. Again, sometimes when it comes to the character family stuff, Doctor Who just leaves the meat and potatoes sitting on the table.
It really does. But such is the nature of Doctor Who that you could revisit those things, and so
true.
I love that.
And Big Finish does come along and fix things every now and then. I just did a Torchwood audio where Martha gets to go into details of why she's not marrying Lucifer from Lucifer anymore. Tom Ellis. And so that was nice. I was like, oh, good. We finally got a little bit of a little more detail on that. Not a lot, but at least some acknowledgement that was a thing that happened in her life and it messed her up and whatnot. And so, but anyway, let's get back to Stoyne. We have a surprise Stoyne. The first time I listened to this, that shocked the hell out of me. There was somebody else on the TARDIS. It's been received fan lore for so long. Even we just saw a Name of the Doctor. There's only the Doctor and Susan on that TARDIS. Then nope. What a great conceit or idea for a surprise twist. The audio I feel sags a little in the middle, but it hits the ground running. It's a beginning. Right. It's absolutely captivating, showing them leaving Gallifrey and getting shot at, and then the surprise twist of finding somebody else in the TARDIS. That was all, and the person's reaction. He was just in here to change the oil, basically, and they drove off with the car. and now, because of the way the Gallifreyan legal system works, he's afraid he's going to be prosecuted and imprisoned, or exiled or something, because he was on the ship and will be seen as an accomplice, helping the Doctor steal the TARDIS, even though that was not what he wanted at all. And you start out feeling really bad for the poor guy, but he turns out to be a bit of a jerk. And apparently that makes him okay to be the villain. I feel like we're in Harry Potter territory where somebody can be like a little rude and then suddenly they're just the bad guy and any bad thing that happens to them is justified or something. And that, I don't know. That feels weird. I mean, Stoin is probably the most blue collar Gallifreyan we've ever met in the entire history of of Gallifrey, of everything we know about Gallifrey. There's probably nobody more blue collar than Stoin, and the fact that he just turns out to be a kind of narrow minded. Close-minded guy who just wants to go home, and that's portrayed as being kind of a bad thing. I mean, like, if you're trying to pull a message out of this story, then working class people are the villains. I mean, we're back in the territory of Plutar, going, "Don't condemn me to a life with the Shobogans." So, and yeah, I hadn't really thought about this the first few times I listened to this audio, but again, Elizabeth Sandifer's TARDIS Eruditorum books did a breakdown of this in her first Doctor volume, and breakdown of this audio, and she made a really good point. It is kind of distasteful that that the only blue collar Gallifreyan whose life is getting trampled by the Doctor is a bad person because they're not willing to just embrace the joy of having their life trampled by the Doctor. And yeah, he's a bit of a jerk and definitely a bit, speciesist and stuff, but the Doctor does effectively kidnap him and maroon him on another planet and ruin his life, and destroy his career, through the Doctor's carelessness. So that seems like a little extreme for just being a bit rude and a bit of a jerk. I mean, I don't think Stoin is bad, but I don't know if within the context of Gallifreyan culture, he really deserved to be canceled that hard.
Right.
It's not like he's Rassilon or something, who totally deserves to be locked up in a tomb. But did you have any thoughts on Stoin?
No, you covered it. I liked the performance very much. It was very good, and I thought he was an interesting character.
Yeah, he definitely falls into that Time Lord type.
Right.
Carol Ann Ford Susan is, thinks that nature is unnatural, but she's still clearly, she doesn't fit with Gallifreyan society any more than she fit with Earth society in 1963. And the Doctor certainly doesn't fit. He's just an oddball, inherently an oddball, the timeless child. He's not even of this world. But Stoin is our anchor point of regular Gallifreyan, and also he's so well anchored that he feels like the most relatable person, arguably. I guess Susan is fairly relatable in this story, but Stoin is fairly relatable as well. Even in his officiousness and bureaucratic outlook and his by the book protocol following. So yeah, he gives us a good example of what it looks like to leave Gallifrey if you're just a regular Gallifreyan, and not somebody weird and zany like the Doctor.
And that led to some funny moments, I feel like. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's what Doctor Who and science fiction in general does, is take the status quo and twist it and poke at it and pull it apart and stuff. And Stoin is definitely a status quo guy. So we have our other real villains in this piece, the protocol obsessed by the book Archeons. Who are these blobs of transparent goo that can form up into various shapes. And I feel like both physically and conceptually, they're kind of hard to get a grip on. There's not a lot. I don't feel like they had a lot to them as a species or an alien, other than we're obsessed with protocol and following the rules, which goes against their very shape. Their very shape is fluid and dynamic and constantly in a state of change, but they're actually just as rigorously fixed in their in their mindset as Stoin is, and in fact, they form an alliance because of their very conservative outlook. Both have very conservative outlooks on life, and they form an alliance against both the Doctor and, of course, humanity, because the weird, unusual nature of humanity is much of what the Doctor loves about it. The unpredictability, the instability of it. So. Did you like the Archeons, or were they pretty forgettable to you?
I think to me they're gonna be pretty forgettable.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good thing there's other stuff in this story, because I don't think this would be a great moment in Doctor Who if it was just the Archeon story. But let's talk about the good of it. As I said, the opening is fantastic. I think that actually having Susan narrate it, and as if she's telling us a story, makes it even better than if it had been a traditional audio drama.
Yeah.
Because she can describe things like there are guards up on the walkway shooting down at us, and the stasers are definitely set for kill. And trying to get all those details into the dialogue when you're doing a straight audio drama can make things feel really cumbersome and artificial and fake. But as a narrator, you can just say, oh, and I could tell that their stasers were set for kill, and and it feels much more natural. So I actually really enjoyed the opening 15 minutes of this audio. Are just fantastic. I'd highly recommend, if you get a chance, to listen to at least the opening 15 minutes. There's that cool moment where if you know what to look for, you can tell that the Doctor is off talking to Clara, while Susan is inside the wrong TARDIS. And the nature of the story feels very much like a Hartnell story. We kidnap some people. So, not Susan and Barbara are teachers. The Stoin is a quadrigger, but the Doctor has this tendency to kidnap people in the Hartnell era and takes them to some strange new world where they're all shocked and want to go home. And we spend a significant amount of time exploring this new environment before we get to the actual plot of this of what's going on the moon. So all of that feels very classic Hartnell, but clearly Mark Platt loves the Hartnell era and loves Hartnell and Susan. He keeps coming back to telling this story in Lungbarrow, in Old Mortality, in a Storm of Angels, and now with The Beginning. He just keeps coming back to this story. I mean, it's a different story every time and a different part of it, but you can assemble all these stories and they're all Mark Platt stories and they're all back to back. It's clear he has an obsession with this era.
He should totally. Well, it's a fun era. I mean, it's a neat time period in the Doctor's life, I guess.
Yes. And right from the beginning positions Doctor Who as a show about finding the balance between order and chaos. And we'll come back to this again and again. Doctor Who, in my opinion, and certainly very much in the classic series and often in the new series, isn't a story about good versus evil. It's a story, or a set of stories, about balance versus chaos, and finding too much balance and order is bad, and too much order is bad, and too much chaos is bad, and trying to find a healthy balance between those two forces is often the Doctor's true task if you step back and look at it on a more symbolic level. And this is a story that's all about that humanity wants to run amok and evolve into all sorts of different, life on Earth wants to run amok and evolve into all these different things. And the Archeons want to rigorously control every step of and every mutation in life on Earth, and are very upset with it. Likewise, Stoin represents wanting to have everything under control and followed by procedure, and the Doctor is this force of pure chaos that nearly gets Stoin killed. And poor Susan stuck in the middle. Susan is more of the balancing factor here.
Right.
We don't really get the Doctor as a balancing factor between chaos and order until really kind of the Pertwee era. He's kind of just a force of chaos for to a large degree, it seems like. But in a lot of the Hartnell and pretty much all of the Troughton. That guy's a wrecking machine there. So, but yes, the very first story, if you were to listen to Doctor Who in chronological order from the Doctor's point of view, order versus chaos is right there. First story out of the gate. It's spelled out very clearly, perhaps even too clearly. But it's a simplistic tale, but it is at least foundational. And as a foundational document, or at least what's portrayed as a foundational document, it came out 50 years late to be truly foundational. It does tell a foundational story. Did you have any good parts that you hadn't already talked about? Anything you wanted to add?
No, I just again want to emphasize, like, I loved hearing this kind of new spin. I hadn't heard it, I hadn't heard this until we were doing this project, so it was really cool to get this new kind of like facet, if you will, of the Doctor's story. So yeah, overall it was a hit for me. And I highly recommend it. And there's a lot of good Time Lord stuff in here. It's like, you're right, the implications of, and this like idea of this revolution. There's just enough to whet the palate and make one wonder what else is going on.
Yeah, far from. I mean, this story picks up as they're running up to the TARDIS, basically, to steal it, and it doesn't. It answers some questions, but there's certainly a whole lot, especially just the audio. The version I have with all the other pieces, all the other data points, makes a fairly somewhat cohesive picture. But just this audio just raises a whole lot more questions and uncertainties than it answers, I feel, which I think is interesting and fun. Let's see. I kind of already mentioned one of my big bad. That I find my attention waning a bit in the middle. I just don't care about the Archaeons much and their plot, and I don't know. Maybe sometimes I feel like maybe this is not really a great moment in Doctor Who. Maybe this is just an okay moment in Doctor Who. I want it to be a great moment because it's the premiere of the first adventure off Gallifrey after he steals the TARDIS, but I don't know if it actually is. Sometimes I kind of was re-listening to this thinking, is this really that great? It's I don't know. I'm not getting fired up on this the way I was with Storm of Angels or Old Mortality.
Well, I mean, it is. I don't know if I would consider it a great moment, but it's acceptable within like the way it's done is acceptable to me to fill in a gap, if you will. Like I'm like, all right, well, I could get it. They were, they were frozen in time for like what was it? How many millions of years? Hundreds of millions of years?
450 million years.
Yeah, so I guess it's an acceptable way of like wrapping, skipping forward. Since they were frozen in time, they weren't having any thoughts or adventures or anything. So the Doctor doesn't technically age, so it doesn't bother anything. You know what I mean? Like it's a weird, interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue the Doctor could try to go around saying but I mean, time itself is frozen, so I suppose that aging shouldn't really count. So, the other thing this is more of a complaint that I got out of TARDIS Eruditorum, but I think is a very valid one. Again, really should check out those TARDIS Eruditorum books. Eruditorum? I don't know what I'm saying. Yeah, they're really good. Is that it doesn't forge a connection between the Doctor and Earth. We have the Doctor leaves Gallifrey and goes to the moon, and there's the Earth up in the sky, and like, oh, the Doctor's gone to Earth. We're gonna find out why the Doctor keeps coming back to Earth. Why is nope, it's just another planet. By the time he leaves, the Doctor and Susan are like, well, let's go visit the Earth, and then they end up going somewhere else instead, and
but
nobody cares.
He does have a sort of passion about isn't there something about like watching the tapes or like watching the data files or something like of Earth, like
but that's before he gets there. We don't actually see him fall in love with the planet in any way.
No, just at the very end, wasn't there something about him Susan says the Doctor just like really marveled at how like like maybe I don't remember. I'm sorry, but it felt like there was a moment at the end that addressed a little bit of it. But you're right, it
Yeah.
doesn't like feel like it does feel a little like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, that leaves it open for somebody else to do that story. And I'm not sure. I don't know if the Doctor's first adventure on the Earth has been done by in any media.
Right.
I'd have to look now. That's not something I know off the top of my head, but, um, well, the, wibbly wobbly. Do you have any wibbly wobbly observations?
No, just the cool TARDIS stuff. Stoin taking it apart, and TARDIS is going toward the breakers. That was cool. I don't know if that's wibbly wobbly, but I like that stuff.
I wanted to see your art of the TARDIS in its
Oh, that's
final
right.
appearance.
That's right. I forgot about it again. Hold on, here we go. There we
There
go.
we
This is
go.
AI generated. It's
Yes.
wild.
Yes, at the end of this audio, when they visit their next planet that turns out not to be the Earth, it also turns out not to be the Earth, the TARDIS turns into a mushroom when they land on a planet of giant mushrooms. And so here's some stylistic art to kind of represent that if you happen to be watching. It's kind of if you ever wondered what would happen if a police box and a mushroom had a baby. Now, if you watch the video version of this, you get to see.
I dig this form of the TARDIS. Actually, the more I look at it, it's like very compelling. It's an interesting. I don't exactly see where there's a door though anymore. So there must be
It's
another
on
way
the
to.
yeah. It must be the other side.
It must be on the other side. It's true.
Yeah. I feel like if Stephen Moffat had seen this, he would have absolutely worked it into a story somehow. So he was so up for fairy tailing Doctor Who that a mushroom TARDIS
It was right up
sounds.
his alley.
Yeah. So let's see. Other wibbly wobbly thing. Susan acknowledges that there are other versions of this story, but that this is her version,
Right.
which I think is a nice little nod to some of the other ways that this has been portrayed, often by Mark Platt himself. And including and it can be seen as a direct reference to Old Mortality, but it could also be seen as a general reference to all the different takes that that writers have kind of had taken on this particular point in the Doctor's life. I do think almost all of them can coexist pretty well. I mean, I guess not the Doctor Who and the Daleks TV big screen movie by Republic Pictures. That cannot be squared with this, where the Doctor builds the TARDIS in the backyard and has two grandchildren and their first trip is to Skaro. Yeah, that one I can't. But so that maybe is another version of the story. You could, but I liked kind of her observation that this is her version. This is how Susan tells the story. So. Another thing I thought, if you're trapped in a temporal orbit, or not really a temporal orbit, if you're frozen in time for 500,000 years, it would probably make it a lot harder for the Time Lords to track you down. That's not why they do it in the story, but it would probably screw things up a bunch because they're looking for a TARDIS that's younger, and
Right.
basically the TARDIS kind of popped off the map for half a billion years. It might also technically be a violation of the laws of time for them to return to Gallifrey in less than half a billion years after they left. Depending on how you interpret the protocols of linearity. So I mean we see the Doctor returns much quicker to Gallifrey than half a billion years. He's not away for that long, but we do have depending on it might just be that he never tells that fact, since he never reports it to them. They never bust him for the crime because they
Right.
don't know he did it. And I don't think Stoin ever makes it back to Gallifrey to narc on him or anything. Well, is there anything else? Any other thoughts you had on the beginning, or shall we move on to the middle?
Let's move on to the middle.
Okay, some Time Lore discussion. Let's talk about why the Doctor left Gallifrey, and I think you had a picture of us of them leaving Gallifrey, I think, in there. But why did they leave? Why did the Doctor leave? Susan is kind of just drug along on this ride, but so despite the entire cosmos being mapped out and recorded in the Matrix, the Doctor does find a reason to leave. He's actually has found several reasons that have been stated in various media over the years. He said he was bored with passively observing and gathering knowledge about the outside universe, and wanted to actually get his fingers dirty. And he realized that if he stayed, he would eventually become just like all the other Time Lords. And this is what terrifies him into leaving. He's also very frustrated with the pain and misery and self-doubt of his life on Gallifrey. And he's very angry at the High Council for its corruption. So, and the arrogance of the High Council and the impotence of the High Council to make any sort of meaningful change on Gallifrey, and for the High Council refusing to tolerate his own arrogance. But he is just as disgusted by the revolutionary fever and gunfire and death going on around him at this time, as there are various riots and assassinations and stuff going on. And he doesn't want either faction, the High Council or the revolting students, I mean that in the best possible sense, to have control of the Hand of Omega. So after the assassination attempt, he realizes he's being scapegoated for the failure of the coup, and being blamed for it, and perhaps somewhat correctly, but we'll get into that later when we talk about the revolution. But he's afraid of being scapegoated. He's kind of bored with his life here and not getting any sort of fulfillment out of it. And he's also finding that life is very dangerous here. And that the people who could make things less dangerous are part of the problem and are making things more dangerous. And then we have, of course, his statement from Twice Upon a Time, where he says, the first Doctor says, "I left Gallifrey to answer a question of my own. By any analysis, evil should always win. Good is not a practical survival strategy. It requires loyalty, self-sacrifice, and love. So why does good prevail? What keeps the balance between good and evil in this appalling universe? Is there some kind of logic, some mysterious force?" And we later, in other TV stories, we hear him stating that his personal truth lies in the stars. And in one of the short stories, I believe he says he decided to leave Gallifrey to find an ideal society. I think all of that kind of comes together, that it wasn't just about running away from Gallifrey. There was also something he was running towards, trying to find this idea of solve this mystery of good and evil, or perhaps maybe order and chaos. But though good and evil is certainly the words the Doctor uses in Twice Upon a Time. And that does tie into some of his ideas about looking for an ideal society. Would probably, right, if he ever found the United Federation of Planets, he might have a better grip on how good triumphs over evil.
Interestingly, later he, in the Matt Smith, the 11th Doctor era, it's more like wanting to come home to Gallifrey. It's an interesting turn, that he makes. Wanting to be forgiven, wanting to come home. Isn't that, the circle, if you will? It's interesting.
Yeah, and I guess you can say he kind of gets that absolution in Hellbent. But then he just immediately leaves and never looks back. I guess he still hasn't found the key to the riddle between good and evil. But the Doctor is not somebody to stick around and build a better society. That he comes in and knocks over the bad guys and then leaves, and trusts that the good guys he leaves behind, the Lady Ruaths that he leaves behind, will be able to build something better. So,
Right.
which didn't really happen in the case of Ruath. I guess it was probably better than the current administration, but I mean, yeah. So there was still a lot of room for improvement after all the revolution stuff was over. So yeah, that's kind of what we know about why the Doctor leaves. We know that the Doctor and Larn flee not just Gallifrey the planet, but also Gallifreyan culture and society. They cut themselves off, and they make no attempt to really recreate Gallifreyan culture within their time capsule or between the two of them. The Doctor has already taken to wearing what looks like Earth clothing when he steals the TARDIS and leaves, which I thought was an odd creative choice, but I guess they didn't want to just Photoshop the head onto some other body and end up with a Carrie Fisher Princess Leia thing. But as is traditional, the Doctor renounced his Prydonian birthright and all of Time Lord society when leaving, and as is traditional, chooses a new name for himself. And we know from the Making of Doctor Who book, written by Terrence Dicks and Malcolm Hulke, two of the script editors, two of the writers of Doctor Who wrote, among other things, War Games, the definitive treatise on who the Doctor is, that the Doctor's name is Delta cubed Sigma Chi squared. If written in Old High Gallifreyan. How you pronounce that, I don't know, but if you write it down in Old High Gallifreyan, then your TARDIS translator circuits will translate it into Delta cubed Sigma Chi squared.
It's very interesting. It sounds like they took a page from Elon Musk's book of naming children.
Can you blame him for dumping this name? So yes, he gets out from under his name day. And again, when I say Delta cubed Sigma Chi squared, what I'm actually just saying is reading out the letters, such as if I was to read out my own name, Brian, which is not the same as saying Brian. But how do we pronounce this? I don't know. There's 500,000 letters in the modern Gallifreyan Omega Bet, or is it 1,000,000 letters in the Gallifreyan Omega Bet? Something like that. It's either 500,000 or 1,000,000. And each of those letters could probably have its own sound, and so and here we have what is it, 3, 4, 5 letters, but at that level you're really almost talking about a pictographic language, so those could actually be words. Each of those letters could actually be a word, perhaps. The Doctor will later say he renounced his name out of despair and will spend his whole life, and it says he spent his whole life running from his true identity. Which was interesting at the time he said it, but became even more interesting when we learned about the Timeless Child. So that begins to say, oh, is that the identity, what he means when he says he's running from his true identity? Because there is evidence that multiple times throughout his lives, he's had a vague inkling of the pre-Hartnell incarnations and pre-Hartnell era of his life and events in the pre-Hartnell era. And he makes occasional comments. And it seems like the Hartnell Doctor might actually have, maybe the Hand of Omega just flat out told him, because the Hand would have been around back then and seen it all. And maybe Susan knew some of it from her weird, very, very weird background. Susan would have known some of it. Maybe she even knew all of it. Maybe she told him.
Right.
So the Doctor will say that the literal translation of his name, and it's not clear if he's speaking of some new name that he's never shared with us, or if it's the old name of that he was given on his name day. But he says his literal name, the literal translation of his name, keeps changing, and that by the beginning of the Time War, it would translate as "foolish wanderer." There's also indications he makes references indicating that he might add a new syllable to his name with each companion he travels with. At least that's something the Seventh Doctor basically says, that he adds a new syllable for each companion he travels with, and that by the time of Girl in the Fireplace, he claims he's forgotten what his original name was. We do know that he continues to be referred to by his his Time Academy designation of Theta Sigma in most Gallifreyan official paperwork. So if you looked up most files relating to the Doctor on Gallifrey, it would just say Theta Sigma, and those could be some sort of initials, like JT or something, or JR. But quite what they stand for, we don't know, and how they connect to the delta cubed sigma chi squared is another question. So, but there are some tidbits on the Doctor's name on the eve of his casting it out and renouncing it, and some details on how the Doctor left Gallifrey, or why the Doctor left Gallifrey. We already covered the how. So, any comment on any of that?
No, I think overall, I think that like this is definitely something that I feel very interested in, and hearing these like little notes is certainly enriching my experience of it. But I really want to see more of it on the big screen, if you will.
Well, do remember the screen wasn't all that big back then.
That's true. That's true.
That's part of the reason they had to do the trick of putting the Doctor on a computer monitor in this screen cap we've got right here, is because the resolution wasn't going to hold up to the HD that they have today.
Right.
It wouldn't even hold up to what we had for videotape back in the 80s. But yes. Well, that is a bit of time lore to go with all of the discussions we've had. Shall we take a look at the TARDIS feature of the week?
Yes, we shall.
All right. You think, I know you're a little under the weather. Were you feeling up to reading it, or should I do it?
I think and I'm sorry in advance to the audience. We usually switch it up, but yeah, I want to preserve my voice a little bit.
Okay, I'll tackle this one. So, as you can see, if you're watching the video version of this, you can see the switch room. It's the room under the console. The switch room is located in the control sphere of the TARDIS and is located directly beneath the master control room. It sounds like, from what they say in the audio, is where Stoyne was. He was probably uptangled in all of those those Artron filaments and transpower systems that you see underneath when the Doctor and Susan ran in the control room up above and activated the TARDIS's dematerialization. And got him a little cooked because he was touching some live wires. In this particular version, it's pretty obvious if there's somebody under here, because the switch room is open to the in the early Matt Smith TARDIS control room. If you're just listening to this, the switch room is open air, and you can literally look through the glass floor and up into the control room, or walk out from under the switch room, and there's a staircase leading up, and you can shout up to somebody up there. And in fact, you can't really come through the main doors without seeing if anyone's in the switch room. But if your desktop theme is set to standard mode, then the switch room is literally its own separate room beneath the master control room. And you wouldn't necessarily know there's somebody there unless you opened up one of the floor panel hatches or found the ladder, or found the staircase that leads down there. The switch room routes signals from the master control console to the rest of the TARDIS via trans-dimensional circuits and links. So even though it looks like that huge pile of cables that are underneath the console don't seem to actually go anywhere, that's because there are trans-dimensional gateways all around the switch room that connect those cables up to the actual systems that they control elsewhere in the TARDIS. The control systems for many of the TARDIS's vital components can be found here. With most let's see, I guess I talked about that bit. Let's see. There's with most desktop themes, a hatch in the floor of the control room provides access to the switch room. The Artron energy stream from the dynamorphic generators travels through the stem at the middle of the switch room and connects to the heart of the master control console. Also known as the main space-time element, if you think heart is too poetic. From there, it is released into the vortex as countermagnetization thrust, which propels the TARDIS through the vortex. So, there's the switch room.
It's very cool. I'm glad you chose this image of the switch room as it's my favorite.
Yeah, it does
TARDIS.
a good job of illustrating it. You can also get to see the switch room in the later Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi era, but I don't think it looks quite as striking as this one. This desktop theme, I think, shows it off better than any of the others.
Yep, very cool. And I particularly am fond of images of the Doctor sitting down there in the swing with his goggles on, and sonic screwdriver, connecting or bypassing perhaps things.
Yeah. You can imagine poor Stoyan swinging in that swing and getting his face burned off.
Right.
Well, if there's nothing else, we should probably wrap things up, I guess. Yes.
All right.
You can find out all you want to know about the TARDIS and Gallifrey culture by checking out allthingstimelord.com. And I believe Sohail is known throughout the internet universe as Starfleet Boy.
That's correct.
So, well, let's tune into the time scanner and see if we're going to find out what happens next to the Doctor and Susan. I'm checking. It seems to be coming in now. If I give this slight adjustment of the sonic screwdriver, we are going to be looking at an Anne. It starts with an Anne. Unearthly. An unearthly woman.
That's
woman.
right.
That didn't end how I was expecting. Who is the unearthly woman? I think I know who the unearthly child is, but who's the unearthly woman? I guess tune in next week and find out. Or, check Big Finish and listen ahead so that you'll be ready for our discussion and not have to worry about spoilers.
Absolutely.
Yep. Until then, see you later in these time and relative dimensions in space.
Until next time.